Welcome back to another edition of the Saturday to Sunday Football Podcast. I am Paul Perdichizzi, and thank you for joining me as always. The NFL Draft is about 1 week away. Here at Saturday to Sunday, we continue to cover it wire to wire. If you missed the last episode, check it out. Matt Wallman was on talking prospects for over an hour, and I'm really excited to once again be joined by special guest tonight, David Syvertsen out of Ourlads. David, thank you for joining us here again at the Saturday Sunday Football Podcast.
Paul, thanks for having me on, man. Always a blast talking ball with you.
Absolutely. So let's jump right into this. I want to pick your brain on a lot of wide receivers and tight ends. I know people that have that little New York flavor, obviously. No, I'm a diehard Giants fan. So those are two positions that I know Giants are looking a lot at, but there's so many different style prospects for so many teams. Let's start right at the top. My listeners have been hearing me talk about the top 3 wide receivers in this class. So to give them an opportunity to hear somebody else maybe talk about them, maybe a slight reason why you like one over the other. Is it the versatility? Do you have them all in the same tier? So maybe just a little bit about that big tier of 3 at the top here of those alpha wide receivers in this draft.
Yeah, I mean, my top 3 are Marvin Harrison, Rome Odunze, Malik Neighbors in that order. With that said, they all, in my grading scale, reached the all-pro projection, and I've never had 3 in the same class. I've never had 2 in the same class. So it's really fun and unique that I have that many grades. And the funny part, the ironic part, what the interesting part is, they all got there different ways. These guys are as polar opposite from each other as you can find and still end up in the elite tier. I mean, Marvin Harrison is your most polished receiver, NFL ready, week 1, NFL ready 2 years ago. The guy that might not have as many impressive physical traits, but by no means is he a slouch. He's just not as big and physical as Rome Odunze. He's not as explosive as Neighbors, but I trust him more. All these guys have sky-high ceilings, but Marvin Harrison, the way he plays the game, the way he runs routes, the way he attacks the football, the know-how, the nuances, the little things that you don't always look for when you're watching wide receivers, but he already has done at a complete high level, just like his father. I mean, he plays the game exactly how you would feel Marvin Harrison Sr.'s son would, just further along developed than everyone at this stage. And I would say his floor is the highest. And you're not going to draft a receiver high because he has a high floor. We know that. He's got the sky-high ceiling. But in terms of, hey, if he bottoms out, if he doesn't reach that ceiling, what kind of impact can he make at the next level? It's still a very high-quality player that I can't imagine a scenario where he's, to use the cliche term, a bust. Rome Odunze is the size, the power, the possession, I still think there's more upside for him to chew off because of the Washington scheme and what they asked him to do there. Kind of a predictable offense. When I was watching Washington, hard to say there, I kind of knew what routes he was running, and I'm not a D coordinator. I don't study their film from a game plan perspective, but there wasn't enough variety to his game. And some look at that as a negative. I look at it as a positive because his skills and his releases and his footwork and how coordinated and balanced he is when he runs routes, I think there's a lot more to chew off that we haven't seen yet. But I think the ability is definitely there. And Malik Neighbors is the guy that, I mean, you just want a dog after the catch, which a lot of teams want, right? They want to get the ball out quick. What happens when they get the ball out quick? Can these guys make plays on their own? He's the dude that creates something out of nothing. 51 missed tackles forced over the past 2 years combined. Rome Odunze and Marvin Harrison, them together combined, don't even come close to what Neighbors did by himself. And that's the kind of feel that I get out of them. So to me, in terms of trying to predict what order these guys come off the board, I don't even want to get into it because I don't know, because it's just going to come down to what kind of receiver do you want. And that's going to dictate everything because overall quality grade-wise, none of them stand out from each other.
Yeah, I think you made some great points there. And, the order in which they come off, I think is going to be fascinating. And we'll see the first team that pulls the trigger, whether it's the Cardinals or the Chargers or the Giants. Like, we'll see what their board says, right? And that's the beauty of the draft. We kind of see it unfold. Let me just, while we're on note 3, I think the Giants listeners would be a little disappointed if I said if it's Malik Neighbors or Rome Odunze, do you think the Giants just say, okay, we have this guy graded high, he's the one of those two? Or do you think they take into account what they currently have on the roster and what may fit with them a little bit better if we're talking trying to break ties? Do you think it's simple as highest grade, he's the guy, we fit the rest around it because this is going to be the alpha? Or do you think they take into consideration maybe what they have there already?
I think they take in consideration into what they have. Everything that Joe Shane, I mean, going back to his introductory press conference, and every time I listen to him talk, he talks about being process oriented, stick to the plan. We made a plan when we came in here. And yes, we hit a little speed bump this past season, mainly because of horrid offensive line play and injuries that we just couldn't keep up with, right? But I still think they have a plan, a 3 to 5 year vision plan. And even though they went backwards from their playoff season in 2022, I still think their vision, what they wanted 2 years ago, is exactly where they want it to be. Just in terms of how they're building the roster, right? They are trying to build the roster through the trenches, right? What did they do with their first 2 picks when they took over the front office? It was Evan Neal, Kayvon Thibodeau, trenches, right? What did they do last year? They went to the defensive side of the ball and found a cornerback, value position. What's the next highest value position beyond quarterback that the league is just pumping these guys up salary-wise year after year? Wide receiver. And now that they've built this roster for 2 years and they've put so many resources into the off season, into the offensive line, it seems to me that it really is funneling towards wide receiver at this pick when you consider what happened in the past year and what they've been wanting to do for the past 2 years. So because they are process oriented, I think they have a certain specific skill set they want to complement what they already have. They have the deep threat. They have the playmaker with the ball in his hands. They have maybe a tight end that can work the seam, work the middle of the field, be a red zone threat, their size guy. They have their versatile Darius Slayton that can kind of do a little bit of everything, but really another downfield threat. That's why I think a lot of these signs point to skill set wise Rome Odunze. I do think Malik Neighbors is very intriguing to a guy like Brian Daboll, who reminds me of Stephon Diggs, who Buffalo traded for when Daboll was there because of that inside-out versatility and because of what he could do after the catch. So right now, gun to my head, if you said they're going to take – if Neighbors or Odunze are both available to them and they're going to go receiver, I think it's going to be Neighbors. But the process-oriented side of me says I think it's going to be Odunze because it kind of gives them something they don't currently have right now, a true contested catch guy.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting, and we'll see if any, off the field stuff breaks any ties or any character stuff. Like, that's always the stuff that, we're not privy to in terms of, evaluating these prospects and, just someone they think they can maybe handle New York and stuff like that. So it'll be fun to kind of see how it plays out if that's the path that the Giants take on draft night. Let's take it to the next supposed, I'll say, because I don't want to speak for you and see what is in your next tier. I feel like the next 3 guys generating buzz that could come off the board, a week from tomorrow, in terms of round 1 of the NFL draft are Brian Thomas Jr., A.D. Mitchell, and his teammate maybe Xavier Worthy. Do you think all of those guys deserve round 1 consideration? Are they your next 3 guys? Are they somewhere in your like top 6 to top 8? Or is there some other guys sprinkled in and maybe you have some of those guys a little lower?
All those guys are my top 7. So
Okay.
Brian Thomas is my wide receiver 4. Love the upside, love the size. I love his ability to get vertical. The workout he put out at the combine, the numbers were 6'3", 209 and a 4'3", 340 with a 38.5-inch vertical. That's been done 3 times since 2005. I mean, you're talking about a special level of athletic ability. You're also talking about a guy that was more basketball oriented growing up in high school. Transitioned. I mean, he always played football. Obviously, he was a high-level recruit ending up at LSU, but he just recently really kind of put all eggs in this football basket, and now we're starting to see him blossom at the right time. I mean, putting up the production he did, knowing that Malik Neighbors was the number 1 pass catcher in college football, to me is actually really impressive. Some aren't impressed by it, but he didn't have a ton of looks. And when he got these looks down the field, he capitalized on them. Excellent body control. And the athletic ability is one of the best profiles we've ever seen. I actually think the same way about Adonai Mitchell. I mean, the size profile, the speed profile, how easy he makes things look. I actually think I start working on my final lone mock draft, 7-rounder actually, and I'm going to put Adonai Mitchell higher because I think his combination of explosion, speed, and how easy he can run routes and attack the ball it's special. But there are some character maturity, work ethic, football player passion questions with him, especially when you watch him after the catch. I mean, he graded out as one of the worst receivers after the catch in the entire country. And he's not a small dude. So you got to ask yourself, does he really want it? And then you see him even say to him, to the media, he's like, yeah, I dog route sometimes, especially when I know the ball's not coming to me. To some, that's a huge red flag. To others, hey, this guy's going to make plays for us. Let them act how they want. Some teams are really fine with guys being divas at the wide receiver position, as long as they produce when their name is called. And I think that his tape with his athletic ability, I mean, I was most surprised by his 40 time of all these receivers. I knew Brian Thomas was going to run fast. I knew Xavier Worthy was going to run fast. I didn't think Mitchell was going to be a sub 4.4 guy. He was 4.34. And that's done at, let's see, he measured in at 205, 6'2", 205, long arms. That kind of speed, that kind of explosion, it's hard to come by. And I think he runs routes like CeeDee Lamb. I think he attacks the ball like CeeDee Lamb. I think there's a lot of CeeDee in his game, and he's got 15, 20 pounds on him. So I think he's going to go a lot higher. And Xavier Worthy I've always had up here. He's been as high as 5 on my stack. He's going to finish out at 7. And it was not a result of the 40 time. That's not why I had him up there. I had him as the elite speed grade before the combine. If you read up on what he did in high school, you knew this guy was going to run fast. You watched the tape, you knew he was going to run fast. I think there's something to him, competitor-wise, physicality, tough, some ability after the catch, great route runner, great releases, that the size concerns don't pop up as much. But the name I haven't heard yet, that is my 5th behind Brian Thomas, is Ladd McConkey. A guy that I think would benefit more from being in a real good passing rhythm offense, because he is small. He's got small hands. He's got some drops on tape. But you put him in an offense like Kansas City, who I think right now I'm going to give to McConkey in my mock draft, that it's an automatic 100 catches a year. He's such and athletically 4.39. Did anyone see that coming? I knew he was going to run fast, but he, without the length, is Garrett Wilson from the Jets, who was a top 10 pick. And the route running prowess, the ability after the catch, the ability to feel the defense pre and post catch is such an advantage for him. And if you put him in an offense where the quarterback puts the ball where it needs to on these short routes, that's the kind of guy that gets the most out of Ladd McConkey. So, and he kind of projects to that late first round tier. So don't be surprised if he ends up being the most productive pass catcher early on in his career.
Yeah, that Kansas City fit would be ideal, and I think you're spot on when you talk about 100 catches. He can walk in there, and the type of player, I think sometimes people pigeonhole him just to be a slot guy, but he's versatile enough to play inside, outside. His route running ability, his separation quickness, he'd fit in there really nicely. Let's take this as some day 2 wide receivers, and I'll kind of group them in, I guess, somewhat stylistically, players. And first group of guys I want to bring up is Keon Coleman out of Florida State. I had a long conversation with Matt Waldman on the last show. I know some of the concerns, but I think people are a little bit too negative on him, the narrative over the last couple months. Xavier Leggett, who obviously broke out this year, and then Jalen Polk, who is another one of those guys, not a great tester, but a lot of ball skills, body control, winning at the catch point. So those 3 guys, a little bit bigger than some of the other guys I'm going to bring up, after them. But maybe just talk us through some of your thoughts on those trio of wide receivers.
So okay, let me start off with Keon Coleman.
Sure.
Everyone loved this kid's tape. Everyone loved what he did in contested situations. He's got one of the best highlight reels. If you're a highlight reel guy, just go spend some time on YouTube watching what he did. I mean, just impressive play after play. And then you read his background, that he was a basketball player at Michigan State. And that is not a slouch program. If you're a ball player at Michigan State, you're very good. You're not just a D1 basketball player. You're an elite D1 basketball player. And you see that pop up the way he plays the game in terms of he's a long strider. A long strider is a guy that just takes a little bit while to get going, right? But once he gets going, once he gets behind you, he's a hard guy to catch up to. And You watch the combine, two things. You watch the 40 time, you see the 4.6, you're like, ugh. But then you watch his combine drills and he's moving faster than everyone. And there's game speed and there's time speed. Do I think he's a blazer? Absolutely not. He's a possession guy every single day of the week. But Coleman, he plays faster than that time. And that's what basketball players do. They take a while to get going, but once they get going, they're tough to find. They're tough to catch. And then you add in some of the return value that he has. I mean, on screen passes, what he was able to do after the catch. Physical, hardworking dude. Now that he's removed from basketball, he can put more of attention on his skill set as a football player. So for teams that are looking for, speed, yeah, I don't think they're going to look at him. But if you want more of a possession guy and you want a little bit more versatility, he was an inside-out threat as well. And you're not losing as much speed as you think that 40 times giving you. I got to think more than 2/3 of the team are going to view this guy as a day 2 pick. He'll end up somewhere in round 2, and whoever gets him is getting, without a doubt, a weapon added to their offense. And who are the other two?
Yeah, and Jalen Polk and Xavier Leggett. But just to follow up on Keon Coleman for 1 second, I think you're spot on. I think people are so overly concerned sometimes about putting everybody in a group based on their size or separation ability. Like I feel like people got some, reservations because of N'Keal Harry, because of maybe what we saw at Quentin Johnston, even though he's still got time to improve upon that. But I've been saying about Keon Coleman, like to me, I think more like T. Higgins, Mike Williams versatility in terms of winning than I see Xavier. Last year I wasn't a big Quentin Johnston guy, and I wasn't a N'Keal Harry guy when he came out that year. So I'm still in on Keon Coleman. Like, and I know Bob McGinn's great draft series came out today, and he was talking that the scouts, he had him up at like from all the reporting, the scouts had him as like their sixth wide receiver, which still would have won around round 2 grade. So I think there's more love probably from the scouts and inside the NFL than maybe what's out there on draft Twitter and what we see a lot in the public narrative that, is looking at the analytics and the different route charting and stuff like that, where I think maybe that doesn't do him any favors. But I think you made up a good point about his play speed, about how he ran, the drills at the combine a lot faster than what we saw in that time speed. So it's going to be fun to kind of see what the NFL thinks of Coleman. And then the other two were Xavier Leggett and Jalen Polk, because, obviously Leggett's very good athleticism in terms of pure speed, but a bigger guy, broke out this year. Jalen Polk, a little bit of a bigger guy, but different style player. So maybe a little bit about those two.
Yeah, I mean, Xavier Leggett he's fun to watch. I was live at the Senior Bowl this year, and the guy walks out of the tunnel, and you're like, is that a linebacker or is that your 6'1", 221 pound wide receiver? It's hard not to think about DK Metcalf when you watch him, warming up and catching balls, but he's not nearly as explosive, as fast. So you can't go down that path with him in terms of comparing him. He's more similar to what Noah Brown has in Houston. He was on the Cowboys for a while, where he's big, he's physical, he knows how to use it. Huge mismatch against some smaller slot corners. But he's got a little bit more twitch to him than you think. He's another long strider. It takes a little bit of time to get going, but he knows how to use that frame. Now, the question with him is, he was a 4-year starter for South Carolina, and you didn't know who he was until 2023. And, I watched some of their tape from 2022. That was a guy I just never really could get to in terms of going back and watching their tape, because I do try to do that as well, especially guys that I have questions on. But he led the SEC in yards per catch with 17.7 in an offense that was struggling to get the ball downfield. Also comes from a really adversity-filled childhood. And you love to see guys come out on the other end like that, because that's part of developing players at the next level is when things don't go your way, and they are not going to go your way at some point, how do you respond? And he's responded by, keeping his head on straight, working hard, and improving on his weaknesses to the point where he got invited to the Senior Bowl. And I've had a scout tell me that works for a team that says he might go in the first round. We always talk about surprise first rounders, and his name came up. So because there's a uniqueness to him. What other guy looks like him playing wide receiver? And yes, are there some things I don't like about his route running and how he attacks the football? Yeah, I don't think he always plays to his size. And now you're just a guy carrying around a little extra weight, which is going to be hard for him to separate. But you can't deny his ability in traffic. He showed that. He's not going to be a fun guy. Whoever covers him is going to be in for a dogfight. And I think you kind of like that. He also was pretty he was a big contributor on special teams all 5 years. So at the very least, you're getting a guy that could probably be a really good gunner at the next level. I know you're not excited to draft gunners, but they matter. Special teams matter, especially with the new return rules that are coming up. I'm telling you, special teams value is going to boost because of that game change, that rule change. Jalen Polk, interesting guy. He's a guy that I pushed down a little further, and it wasn't because I don't like him, right? It's because there's just so many receivers in this class that, you put a gun to my head and said, hey, you got to pick Polk or this guy. I'm taking the other guy. You take Polk or this guy. He's taking the other guy. But he's still, I think Peter Schrager just put him in his first round mock draft, and there is some love for him. I think Nate Tice from The Athletic that our Yahoo, I really value his opinion with receivers. He has a high outlook on Jalen Polk. The issue to me is I don't see a standout trait to his game. I did see a few too many drops or double catches or balls that I simply think he should have come down with. And he ran in the 4.5s. He's got good size, not great size. And to me, there's just a lot of average to his game. And, where he gets linked up, as with is the case with all the receivers, where they get linked up with and what quarterbacks they're with and what offenses they're with, is really going to dictate how much success they have. But in an offense where, Rome Odunze and even Jalen McMillan, like those guys went off in their own respective years. Polk was, to me, like I thought he should have produced more, and I didn't love the workout either. So that's kind of why I kind of bumped him down to that round 4 area. But in that area of the draft, it's tremendous value.
Yeah, this wide receiver class really has whatever you're looking for, whatever flavor, whatever size, whatever body type, whatever, inside, outside. Two guys that I think have some inside outside versatility. And I'm curious to hear whether you think they're better inside or outside in terms of projecting to the next level. It's Ricky Pearsall out of Florida, who's had a great pre-draft process. Troy Franklin out of Oregon. I know he's got the size, but the body, the frame is definitely concerning. Do you look at those two as inside outside versatility? Do you think they are better suited for either on the inside or on the outside in terms of how you think their game translates?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big Ricky Pearsall guy. What Amon-Ra St. Brown is giving Detroit is what I think Pearsall can give an offense at the next level. I think he can play outside, but I think he does his best work as a slot, just with how good his route running and how easy it is and how natural it is for him to frame the football and bring it in. Doesn't put the ball on the ground ever. A little more dangerous than you think after the catch. And then we saw at the combine what he could do athletically. I mean, a 42-inch vertical, a 4.4 140, a 6.64 3-cone. This guy is a better athlete than Malik Neighbors across the board. But you never hear that, right? If Malik Neighbors put up all these workout times, people will be blown up about it. Pearsall's better athletically. I think he's got better hands. So he's pretty high up my stack. He's right behind the guys that we've already mentioned. Overall, 2nd round pick all day. 1st round, I would even consider him if I was a team like the Chiefs instead of Ladd McConkey. Just a guy that is going to be at the right place at the right time. He's going to snap his routes back at the right time with good timing. He's going to attack the football and not drop it. I am all in on Ricky Pearsall. For the Giants, I think if they go elsewhere in round 1, that's a guy I have circled for round 2. But I don't think he'll drop that far. Troy Franklin is a guy that I loved on tape. I watched so much Oregon. I watched so much Bo Nix. And again, another guy that has like a bigger version of Deshaun Jackson to him in terms of how his body type, A, but B, how easily he was getting behind defensive backs, how well he tracks the deep ball. And the thing I love about his game the most is how competitive he is. He's not at first I thought he was a Jalen Hyatt type, just like a real vertical threat. He's going to get behind you and he'll make those big plays. But Franklin is a dog after the catch. He'll break tackles. He'll lower his shoulder. He'll block. I mean, there's a lot to like about him. The comparison that I have on him is DJ Shark, who you might not think is a household name, but the kid's going to be in the league a long time. He's going to score touchdowns. I don't think he'll ever be a number 1. He might not even be a number 2, but he's going to be a guy that everyone wants at some point, because he can take the top off of defense and he's competitive. And I think that's what makes him stand out among other vertical threats, is how competitive and how physical he is.
Yeah, Franklin's one of those guys that, like, obviously the monster production this year with Bo Nix. I know the frame definitely causes some people to have concern, but I mean, the explosiveness, the ability to get vertical, really intrigues me as a team that's looking to add more speed and more of that vertical component as well. Let's take this to two guys who I do think pencil in as probably exclusively slot at the next level. But if you think they have some outside versatility, let me know. And that's Roman Wilson out of Michigan and Malachi Corley. Do you have a preference between those two? Do you think they're slot only at the next level?
I'm Roman Wilson. I've been on Roman Wilson for 2 years now. Just when I first started hearing about him, and I watched my first tape on him in 2022, I was just like, wow, I think this kid's going to come out. I think he's going to grade out with these Ohio State receivers that have been coming out lately, first round. Like, he has like some Chris Olave movement traits to him. He's not, I wouldn't call Chris Olave bigger, but Roman Wilson's got a little, shorter arm, shorter reach, that kind of thing. I do think both of these guys project to the slot at the next level. If you said, hey, can one of these guys play on the outside based on what he's proven, it's Roman. But the body type always scares me with these guys on the outside because they're just so short-limbed, and they do their best work running on routes underneath. They're going to get open whenever they want. They can run whatever route they want to run. Corley is a little bit more physical after the catch. I think there's a running back type player, running back mentality inside of him, where Roman Wilson to me is a little bit more of I wouldn't call him soft. He's not soft at all. He's a tough dude, but he's not a guy that's just going to be breaking tackles left and right. I mean, Malachi Corley, I think 30% of his catches or 40% of his catches were behind line of scrimmage. And so you have to kind of take his production with a grain of salt. But what you get out of watching his tape is how much he wants to break tackles, what he can do after the catch. He is a running back that to me, that plays wide receiver. He's not a wide receiver that plays running back like some other guys. He is a running back that plays wide receiver, great routes, had a great workout at his pro day. So you got answer some speed questions, but I don't see either one of these guys ever being a guy that's going to consistently get over the top. And to me, that kind of crosses you off being an outside receiver unless you have outstanding size, which neither of these guys have. So I do think they're going to be slot, 80% of the time.
Yeah, I think you're right. And we see that similarly between those two guys. Last wide receiver question, and I'm going to throw out a handful of names that are getting some day two buzz. I think some of them will probably slide to the early portion of day three. Maybe pick one or two that you have your highest grades on or you're most intrigued with. We got Des Walker out of UNC. Obviously, once he got back, he was Drake May's top guy this year. Malik Washington out of Virginia is generating a lot of buzz. Jalen McMillan, the third guy over there in Washington. You got Javon Baker, obviously ended up at UCF. Jermaine Burden, who moved around a little bit, and Brendan Rice. Any of those guys, one or two of those guys stand out of that group? Or maybe if there's somebody that I completely skipped that's pretty high on your board, feel free to throw them in to the mix here. But maybe one or two names from that list I just gave you that you prefer the most.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. Those guys are almost within 5 or 6 spots of each other. I kind of have like that late third, early fourth round grade on most of those guys. A little lower on Tez Walker than the market. I would say my favorite there is probably Malik Washington. I mean, he's just one of my favorite guys to watch play the game. I do have him one spot behind Javon Baker, but in a slightly lower grade. But Malik is just a fun kid to watch. Slot only type, 5'8", 191. That is a thick dude. And with how well he moves athletically and how well he attacks the ball, I don't want to put Tyreek Hill on his play because no one's Tyreek Hill. I've never seen anyone that's even close to him. Just the way he plays. But I did put Jalen Waddle comparison next to him, and I think he's a blend of the two. He's somewhere between those two. And Jalen Waddle was a first round pick. And the Malik, to me, I mean, this is a kid that, he's an All-American in 2023. He led the nation in catches. He finished second in yards, and he hauled in 80% of his targets, 80+% of his targets. He's not just explosive, but he's shifty, and that movement combination trait is tough to find. Now at 5'8", he's pretty much a slot only, right? And that's why I think sometimes I put a guy like Javon Baker above him. That guy, he was supposed to be the next dude at Alabama. He had a couple off-field issues. And he was also just buried on the depth chart. So he goes to Central Florida and just tore it up there. I mean, he was all Big 12, 2023 and 2022. He led the country in yards per catch, in an offense that he's being thrown to the ball by a guy that's not going to be drafted. So there's a lot to like about him. I love how he attacks the football. For a guy that's 6'1", 200 pounds, he's a beast in 50-50 situations. And it's because of how coordinated and how good he is at high pointing the football. It's a skill. It's something you look for when you break these guys down. And I think his skill is right up there with Odunze. He's just not as big, and he didn't have Michael Penix throwing him the ball. So I think that's a guy that, even just watching him run routes at the Senior Bowl in comparison to others, he moves different. There's things about him. You kind of understand why he was really highly touted at Alabama, because there's things that he can do that these guys just can't do. And then he can also attack the ball. You just got to ask yourself, is he really all in on the game? There's been a few issues with him off the field. But if he is, I think he's got all the talent of some of the top 10 guys in this class.
Yeah, and I think Jermaine Burton could probably be added to that mix too. Similar questions, but
very similar.
Some of the off the field stuff, and it'll be interesting to see, do any of those guys sneak into the top 100, or do those maybe concerns potentially make them value pick somewhere in round 4 based on their talent, which probably screams round 3. Dave, you got a few minutes for tight ends?
Yep, absolutely.
Okay. Before we pivot to tight ends, let me ask you this question. Where do you have, because some people have them on their tight end stack, some people have them on their wide receiver stack. Johnny Wilson from Florida State, do you have him on the wide receivers? Do you have him on the tight ends? Do you have him stacked in both places, depending on how the NFL sees them?
I graded them both in both spots, but I put him in my tight end stack. He's my number 5 tight end in the class. He's Darren Waller, reincarnated, a college wide receiver that just has unreal measurables that you just never see at wide receiver. And you got to think he's going to put some weight on at the next level. Another thing about that never gets talked about with him, he's a physical blocker. Like, I actually think he's got some blocking upside that if he gets linked up with the right coach and he really applies himself, I think he could be a hand in dirt tight end. He could be 240 plus, 250, 245 plus in no time. I mean, no matter what he's going to line up as a matchup problem for the defense. That's what their teams are going to do with them. They'll put him in the slot a lot, red zone weapon. Some things I just don't like about his game at wide receiver. So I did grade him at both, and the tight end grade was considerably higher. So I think that's how the league will view him as well. I think that's eventually where he's going to line up, slot tight end type.
Yeah, and you mentioned that you have him 5th on your tight end stack. I'm assuming we obviously all know that Brock Bowers is probably sitting at the top. So maybe fill in the gap there. What do you have as your 2, 3, 4 in that tight ends? Do you think they're guys that weren't going in on the day 2 mix, or collectively just a little bit a weaker group compared to obviously last year's really strong group? Or do you think some of those guys should maybe go day 2 and some should fall to maybe day 3?
Yeah, definitely a weaker group than we saw last year. I put out a tweet in the fall before guys are obviously declaring, and I was saying this tight end group could be right up there with what we had, and not everyone agreed. But then 2 of the 3 of the guys that I had ended up going back to school, so we'll have to look for those guys in next year's draft. But still, in my opinion, still a solid group overall. Just maybe not as top heavy. Like, you got Brock Bowers, who could grade out as one of the top tight ends ever. I still think there's I don't want to put a number on it. I think he's in the discussion with the Giants at 6. I really do. I think he can be drafted that high. I think it's justified. It's definitely not a betting favorite, but if there is a market for him to be picked by the Giants at 6 and you get great odds on it, I'd put some coin on there, because it's just it's something that nobody sees coming. And I think this Giants front office is really good at using certain people in the media to get everyone away from what they're actually thinking about. And Brock Bowers' name hasn't come up once. And I know they have visited with him. So that's something that just to keep an eye on. But Ben Sinnott, the tight end from Kansas State, is a guy that I really, really started to like as I started to watch the actual tape on him. When I was watching broadcast games or kind of watching him in passing, I was like, nice little player, move tight end, can play fullback. But you read about him, like, he was a hockey dude growing up, and he didn't have any FBS offers. He was a 0-star recruit, and he ends up the top fullback in the country, won that award. And he's not just a fullback, trust me. It's just a guy that can line up back there. And then you start to see what he does as a blocker. Then you start to see what he does after the catch. And then the ball skills at the combine, they stood out to me. I evaluate the drills at the combine just as much as I evaluate the measurables. And it was like a different level compared to everyone, just high pointing the football, no wiggle on the ball when it touches his hands. I like gamers like him. I actually saw some Sam Laporta in him, a guy that I had graded above Michael Mayer last year, and ends up being the top rookie tight end in the class last year. And I think there's some of that in him. Jatavian Sanders is my number 3. Last summer, I thought he could have been like a hair under Brock Bowers, first round pick, yard after catch guy, line up everywhere, tough as nails. He didn't have the year I wanted him to have. And then the pre-draft process has been really unfriendly to him. He had a really poor workout, but I still see some Isaiah Likely in him where, okay, you might not love the measurables, but the dude's a player. And he knows how to catch the ball in contested situations. He knows how to twist and turn his body in the air, and he's competitive. I think that's my favorite part about his game. He will block his ass off, both in line and in space against linebackers. And I just think that we haven't seen the best of him yet. And he's a guy that I would like to gamble on. Number 4 is another gamble for different reasons. It's Theo Johnson, 6'6", 259, classic wide tight end build. Sneaky speed, and I don't think everyone understands how fast this dude is. According to Zebra Technologies at the Senior Bowl, he was the fastest tight end there by a wide margin. He was running as fast as some of the tight ends, and they do GPS tracking. So it's not a 40 time. You're not in tights and deciding when you get to run, right? Do you have football speed? Can you run fast when you need to run fast? But he was a part of a tight end duo there that the other kid, he went back to school. We'll be talking about him next year. And I think that kind of hindered him a little bit in terms of, hey, we don't really know what he can do because they were sharing the ball so much and they ran the ball a lot. And they had a couple of receivers that they were throwing the ball to. But I went on record saying this is the highest ceiling tight end in this class, including Brock Bowers. You know, Brock Bowers is a guy that I think he can be a great player, but we kind of know what he is already. He's going to be a George Kittle at best, which is all pro caliber. I'm all about bringing that in. But what this kid can do physically and some of the footwork that he shows and the body control, if this kid hits his upside, his actual ceiling, you're talking about one of the best tight ends in the game. And this is a guy that could be had in right now, maybe round 3.
Yeah, I love the synopsis there you just had on some of these players. And I love that you brought up Isaiah Likely because here at Saturday Sunday, that's been the name I've been throwing out with Jatavian Sanders during this pre-draft process that we all thought Likely was going to test really well. He did not do well in the pre-draft process, but then as soon as he gets to the NFL and even that first preseason, you started seeing that same playmaking ability, that same speed. And I kind of feel like Jatavian Sanders, his play speed just to me was far superior than what we saw at the combine. Maybe he didn't, whatever the case, he didn't test well, but yeah. I still like his game, but Sinat's the guy that I'm really intrigued with. I think I talked about it a lot this year. Like he was like the focal point of that K-State offense, like a tight end. That's very rare.
In more ways than one. I mean, he was one of their best blockers too. They used him as a weapon, as a blocker, lead blocker, pulling across the line, everything.
Yeah, and you mentioned, Theo Johnson, he's one of those guys, and, I hate to say it because sometimes it's hard to believe it and people have a hard time, especially if you put it on Twitter, like he's going to be a better NFL player than college player. But I really do think for Johnson's case, the tight ends, what they're asked to do sometimes at college is very different than what they're going to be asked to do in the NFL. Yeah. I think with that athleticism and the untapped receiving upside, it adds a lot of intrigue. And you mentioned Warren, right? He's going to be one of the top guys next year. Warren, yep. And you mentioned the second one. Was it Nesbitt from North Carolina, or is there a different guy I'm forgetting? Nesbitt?
Nesbitt's the one from North Carolina.
Yep. So those are the two that you said you thought might have come out that were going to be ranked high, or am I forgetting?
Sorry. That wasn't who I was talking about. The kid, I mean, he is a guy that I think will be a top 65 pick next year. The kid from Notre Dame that tore his ACL.
Okay.
And then there was another kid from Iowa, Luke Lachey, that I think is going to be
Luke Lachey. Yeah, very good. Iowa just keeps.
I thought all those guys were going to be coming out, so that's why I said that. I was like, man, this is another stacked tight end group. But a few of them went back, and that there's another ones coming up the pipeline that are going to be juniors next year. That if all these guys come out, I mean, you might have 3 or 4 first round grades next year on tight ends.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting class next year. Final thoughts on this tight end class. do you have a day 2 grade on anybody else? Jared Wiley, Cade Stover? Do you think Eric All's an interesting guy in round 4, round 5? I know he's coming back from the injury, but he's a guy that I think a lot of people, I know I've seen Lewis Reddick speak very glowingly, I believe, on Eric All and some other people. Any of those guys that stand out as maybe intrigue you the most if they fall to round 4, and All probably will fall to round 5 with the injury concerns?
Yeah, I mean, Eric All is definitely a guy that's intriguing, but the medicals are huge with him. He had a serious back injury that required surgery, and then he tore his ACL. I was watching the game live when he got hit. It was bad. It was a rough knee injury. And ACLs are not what they used to be. Guys do come back from them, but the back injury, in addition to that, for a guy that his game is based on movement. Even before he went to Iowa, the name Noah Fant was coming up when I was watching his tape at Michigan, because he was a guy that I was preparing to be coming out last year before he got hurt. And that's how Luke Schoonmaker really broke out, is that he got full dosage of the snaps there. So I've been watching this guy for a long time, and that's the name that came to mind when I was watching him move. But if he loses even just a half a step, you're kind of losing the reason why he's an NFL prospect in general. But on day 3, it's worth a shot, because he can do things. He can run routes. He can do things after the catch that most of these guys cannot. So, and this is a position where I think this is the spot you want to find your matchup problem. I think that's why the Giants went after Dan Waller, a risk, and it looks like it's not going to work out for them, especially if he retires this year. But it's a spot that if you can find a real dude there, I think it makes a huge difference. I mean, look no further than the 2 teams that have been in the Super Bowl, Travis Kelce, George Kittle, these guys, they make a huge difference. Is there anyone else that I have a day 2 grade on? No. Am I intrigued by a Jared Wiley? I am. A former quarterback that also suffered an injury when he was at Texas early on, almost left the game, comes back to TCU. And another guy that last year I was watching them play when Max Duggan was playing quarterback, and I was like, this kid might come out. He's really intriguing. Goes back to school. Saw him at the Senior Bowl. I think he's one of the best movers of the tight end. He's got great size, 6'6", 250, really fluid. Not the most physical guy in the world. I think I remember seeing a stat he only broke 3 or 4 tackles, which is a low number for a tight end. But beyond that, the tight end class to me is just kind of like what you see every year. Just like a couple guys that are good football players, gritty. Some of them have some speed. Some of them have some length, but they all miss traits, multiple traits that you need to have to be a day 2 pick at this position. But by every year we see tight ends that contribute at a high level. That were drafted on day 3. The name that has come up in conversation with me a few times is Jaheim Bell from Florida State, who's obviously undersized, but this is a guy that played power running. He was a running back prior to being moved to tight end. And now I think he's a guy that if the right offensive scheme, right offensive mind gets their hands on him, he's someone that can just help and wear a lot of hats for this team. A really good athlete too, good football player. He's a great blocker in space. He'll probably be, the few teams in the league that use a fullback. I think that's what they're going to do with him. They draft him, put him at fullback, but he'll also be a part of their actual offense.
Yeah, I've been throwing out the name Chigakonkwo as a guy that you didn't have to, like, for Jaheim Bell. You got to try to have a plan for him. And what is it about Cade Stover? Because I feel like when the narrative started, or at the end of the year, he was a little bit higher up on the consensus board, and he tested out pretty well. I actually thought he might even run slower than 4.65. But is there something about him that maybe was it the Ohio State bump and the media was a little bit high on him? Then he just kind of came back down once the scouts and the NFL kind of get into it, or is there something a little bit more glaring that maybe about him that you or others are concerned about?
Yeah, I mean, I have him high enough. Like, I've always viewed him as like a 4th rounder type. I think I ended up like 4th, 5th round on him.
Okay.
I think the standout thing that kind of goes against him is the lack of length, lack of wingspan. His frame is maxed out, and you're talking about a guy that's an average athlete. I was surprised by the 4.65 too. I didn't see that on tape, but he's a chew glass kind of guy, and this is the kind of guy that if you're kind of overlooking him, he's like your number 2 tight end. He's on the field. He's going to make plays. Really good contested catch guy. He's tough as nails, breaks a lot of tackles. Former outside linebacker and defensive end that's only been playing tight end for a couple of years. He was an all-state basketball player in high school. So you kind of just had this like, all right, this is a competitor. This guy is going to get it done. He's going to find a way to stick to a roster. And his defensive background is going to open doors for him. For what a lot of teams look for on day 3, and that's, can you help us out on special teams? And he's going to have like that inside track. So Day 3, yes, but maybe towards the top of day 3 if these special team coaches really kind of get a lot of say in what they do. But I don't have him graded high, but I would love this guy on my team. I know that I'm not probably going to get a starting tight end out of him, but I can get a guy that can help out, can be moved around a little bit, and he's going to add to the personality of my defense. Of my offense.
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting because I don't think it's such a great wide receiver class, such a great offensive line class. We might have 7 quarterbacks go in the top 100. So you're going to see probably only 4 tight ends, maybe 5 in the top 100, which I think opens the door where I think there's going to be, like the Giants got Daniel Bellinger in the start of the 4th round. Like I think there's going to be some quality guys like that could emerge as maybe prototypically tight end 2s, but maybe have a chance to develop down the line. I think there's going to be a decent amount of intriguing guys that could be there in that round 4 mix, which is some of the guys we talked about, or maybe a stab at Tanner McLaughlin or AJ Barner or Tip Ryman, and see if there's some untapped pass catching there with the athletic testing and good blocking skills there. So there's a handful of guys once we get to day 3 that I think are going to be interesting for teams to kind of add some depth and them have a role, probably step in and could be a tight end 2 at worst case scenario. It's going to be interesting to see kind of how the NFL prioritizes them in terms of their pecking order. David, always a pleasure to have you on. Appreciate giving us almost 45 minutes of your time. Please let the audience know where they can find you. Let them, anything that you want to, push a narrative in terms of, I know you guys, I think did a draft guide, your YouTube stuff, anything you want to share with the listeners.
Thanks, Paul. Always a pleasure. Always honored to come on and talk ball with you. Ourlads, we just came out with a YouTube channel in January, and if you know anything about Ourlads, it's that's a big deal. That's a big step because we're very old school, and I like being a part of something that's old school. Just old breakdown film, write about it, send it out. Like we don't want to get too into production and stuff, but we do want to grow the market. We want to grow our following a little bit, and just but we still are nuts and bolts, all steak, no sizzle. We still have a draft guide that we send out, hard copy. Which I think. I don't want to get too off track here, but I think there's a lot of value in having a book in front of you and opening pages and turning back and forth instead of being in front of a screen all day. So we still spend the money to put that draft guide together, and we'll send. There's still time. If you order it now at ourlads.com, you'll have it on your doorstep before the draft. We also have a PDF version now, so if you do want to have it on your screen, on your phone, on your tablet, you can order the PDF. It is cheaper, and you'll have that within a couple of days as well. I'll be pretty active between now, but especially draft weekend. I tweet out every day 1 and day 2 pick, and I try to do as much as I can on day 3. It's a different animal on day 3 with the announcement of the picks and how fast they come down the tube, but and some of the post draft work that we do. So you can follow me at ourlads_sci, and I'll give you a little quick synopsis on every pick. I'll try to talk about the player and talk about the fit. And we also send out a post-draft grading / analysis. We get every pick in a book that we send out, again, hard copy, and we kind of break down every pick and how they fit in with every team. So that's really a unique thing that we do. But those are the 2 things I'd say, to Paul. Try to give us a follow or subscribe on YouTube to the Ourlads channel. And if you want some reading material for draft weekend, read about these guys. Order the draft guide at ourlads.com.
Guys, make sure you're following David, checking out his work over there at Ourlads. Great stuff. Anytime I get to talk to David, I learn a lot about these prospects as well and really enjoy his analysis. Make sure you're following him draft weekend. And hopefully, David, we can get you back on sometime post-draft and dissect a little bit landing spots with all these guys once we know kind of how they fit. That's the next piece of the puzzle. That's always fun to talk about once we get through draft weekend for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's such a long process, but it almost tells me sometimes it's even more interesting once the draft's over to see where these guys land, because you can actually envision it and kind of figure out how these teams are going to use them.
Absolutely. So guys, make sure you're following David everywhere. Again, thank you so much for coming on the show. On behalf of David, on behalf of our sound tech engineer, David Nakano, and myself, thank you for joining us. And we look forward next time taking you from Saturday to Sunday.